I'd like to hear Nicole Banks.
I am here.
We are. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking your time out this morning. We're going to go ahead and get ready to get started. The quarterly meeting of the Executive Committee for the Weedon Developmental Council will not come to order. Just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your busy day this morning. All of our attendees, and thank you for the guests in the chat. Before I go any further, we're going to go ahead and do a roll call to make sure we have established a quorum. Mr. Real. Mr. Crystal? Present. Thank you. It's still early.
Ms. Banks?
I'm present.
Ms. Gill? Present. Dr. McKee?
Present.
Jill Hayno?
Present.
Thank you. And just for a little morning humor, I thought she was following me up when she called my name. And I looked at it, don't find it. So that's why we had that brief moment. I'm glad to be back, everybody, and see everyone. So let's go ahead and we'll get the mission statement up and go over the ground rules. Okay, the mission statement for the Louisiana Developmental Disabilities Council: to increase independence, self-determination, productivity, integration, and inclusion for Louisianians with developmental disabilities by engaging in advocacy, capacity building, and systems change. Just a few teleconference protocols. Council meetings shall be accessible via Zoom and live stream on YouTube. Council or committee members will participate via Zoom and shall be considered present when they display a live feed of their face with their first and last name. have microphones muted unless called upon by the chairperson. Electronically raise their hand to request the chair recognize them to speak. Once recognized by the chair, the microphone shall be turned on. After speaking, the microphone shall be returned to mute. Guests may participate via Zoom or observe meetings live on YouTube. All public meetings shall be recorded and may be made available on the council's YouTube channel as determined appropriate by the chairperson. Public comments submitted during the meeting via any format shall be considered. During the Zoom meeting, guests may electronically raise their hand to request comment. Upon being recognized to speak by the chair, the microphone shall be turned on. After speaking, the microphone shall be returned to mute. Post comments relevant to the item under consideration in the chat box. Public comments of a person's character will not be heard if the comment continues after being asked to stop by the chairperson. Council staff may be instructed in the meeting. The chairperson will notify the executive committee of this occurrence. Council chair will seek guidance to determine legally appropriate to redact or share the video of the council meeting. All right. Moving forward, the next item of business is approval of the meeting summary for July 20th executive committee meeting, which was distributed. The meeting summary will not be read unless requested by a member. Are there any corrections? Do you have in the chat box? You have a question? We have a
So basically, executive committee.
Yes.
Yes.
You're in good stuff. Thank you for coming. So if there's no objection, the meeting summary is approved. See that there's none in the chat box. You did confirm that in the chat box recording.
Forgive me, it was just saying.
You're saying the norm, okay. Thank you for that. Okay, it's like I said, the meeting summary is approved. So moving forward, the proposal for youth leadership forum contract. The next item up for business is a proposal for youth, youth forum contract. Do you have any discussion in regards to it?
Rowan is attending this meeting.
She was having.
Okay, great. Ms. Dejan, you recognize.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak to you today. Our YLF ad hoc committee has been working very hard over the past year to develop a youth leadership forum for our state that fits our state and also adheres to national standards. So there is an association called the Association for Youth Leadership Forums. It is the total of all the youth leadership forums across the country. Over 30 states have YLFs currently, and they set national standards for YLFs. And so we had 2 submissions for a fiscal agent for our YLF here in Louisiana. And when these 2 submissions were brought forward to our committee was really confused by one. So we had a proposal by Families Helping Families of Greater Baton Rouge and a proposal by Families Helping Families of Acadiana. And my committee was actually very confused by Greater Baton Rouge's because it didn't seem to be in line with any of the committee's work that we had done so far. It didn't really seem to plan a YLF. And as I culled through the standards from the National Association, I realized that it actually wouldn't be able to be called a YLF by national standards because it doesn't include, like, for instance, the ADA definition of disability, which is a requirement for YLFs. And it didn't really emphasize empowering people with disabilities, which is also a requirement by national standards. On the other hand, we also had a submission by Families Helping Families of Acadiana. And so Families Helping Families of Acadiana really adhered to what our committee had already planned and decided for our YLF, and really, through long discussions, like I said, had decided it really adheres to national standards. So we know that we'll have no issues with the National Association, and it's tailored to what fits our state and our DD Council as well. And so our committee ultimately decided to recommend the proposal that Families Helping Families of Acadiana submitted, because we feel like Families Helping Families of Acadiana really demonstrated an ability to maintain the integrity of our youth leadership forum. And for our youth, that's going to be imperative, especially as we expect them to become adult advocates in our community as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dejan. Do we have any questions in regard from the committee members? Do we have any? Okay, I see your hand. Okay, Ms. Corley, I see your hand. You're recognized by the chair. You have the floor.
Great morning, Mr. Chair and Executive Council. Okay, so I've had the opportunity to review all of the actual meetings as well as I participated in a lot of the meetings. And it was a lot of information that was not addressed that left me questioning things such as the what are the actual national standards, right? So number one, I'm sure the agenda and stuff that was proposed, that does not show where they're actually really teaching them leadership, but more of just telling them the history of the disabilities. And with leadership, there's classes that actually teach them about advocacy and how to actually get things accomplished in the disabilities arena. This here is being held at a university, which can then get people confused with things that maybe LA Pi or LRS is actually doing as it relates to career and technical training or college preparedness. And it's not going to afford individuals with disabilities the opportunity to actually be able to matriculate through the building. I know that in this actual situation, they want the kids to be housed in a dormitory. Dormitories are closed to the public throughout. They're not about to just allow us to walk through there with our children with disabilities so that they can actually get acclimated to actually staying there over a weekend. So we have to be very honest about what it's going to look like and how and what all is going to address. And there were a lot of questions as it related to what the fiscal agent would actually be able to do and not be able to do that's not actually outlined in the contract. So those questions actually were left unanswered. And those are the questions that I actually have today for our executive committee. How can we choose a proposal when we don't even have a contract yet that actually states what that fiscal agent will be responsible to adhere to? So we do need to look at that. And then once we look at that and we have created a contract, then we need to actually let the solicitation of proposals go back out, because that is not something that has actually been addressed. And it was a lot of things in regards to that. If you just go back and look at the meeting that happened on the other day, as well as the meeting prior to that. And I also want to express that there was no diversity representation on that actual ad hoc. I brought it up every single meeting. No diversity. So diversity, equity, and inclusion need to be at the forefront for every single committee, as well as the training for whatever fiscal agent and the staff that will be working with our individuals with disabilities for YLF. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corley. I see Ms. Dejan has her hand.
Ms. Lillian
up.
has her hand raised.
I'm gonna yield the floor to Ms. Dejan. Ms. Dejan, you have the floor.
Hey, everyone. So Ms. Corley stated a lot of questions and a lot of concerns. Actually, most of these concerns and these questions have been addressed in our committee meetings. I think, a lot of the problem comes in is Ms. Corley is right. Our meetings do contain a lot of information because planning YLFs are no simple deal, correct? And so we've had a lot of very dense meetings, and a lot of these topics were discussed at very specific meetings. So I'll go through each of the concerns and explain where the information and the decisions came from. So the first concern was, where do these national standards come from? Many times our committee has referred to the AYLF manual. I will put that in the chat right now. there is the link. So there is a manual that guides the running of YLFs across the country. So we make sure that YLFs are following best practices for our youth, right? So Ms. Corley also had a lot of concerns about our schedule. So our schedule isn't just focused on, let's say, legislative advocacy, right? It's also focused on self-advocacy as well. So I'd be happy to drop the schedule in the chat also. Just let me know if that's something that you guys would like. For instance, we have a session planned on managing your mental health. We understand people with disabilities are more likely to face mental health issues. So we felt like that was important when talking about leadership, because if you're not mentally healthy yourself, how are you then going to go and lead an entire community, right? We also have a section on dating and relationships. So our delegates know how to have healthy relationships in their life. We also have sessions on legislative advocacy and disability history. And one of the things is disability history is recommended by the National Association, because if you don't know where you've come from, how do you know where you're going? The third concern that I noticed she had was pertaining to the university. Many YLFs across the country host their YLFs on a university campus. So your delegates have that opportunity to experience what going to college feels like away from your mom and dad. So they have that opportunity to experience sleeping away at home in a safe environment where, you know, they're learning, they're growing as individuals, but they also have that extra support that they need. And they get to figure out, okay, maybe living in a dorm is going to be great, or maybe living in a dorm really just isn't for me. Either way, they get empowered to make that decision for their own future. Third, there was a conversation about what the fiscal agent is and is not able to do. Some of those conversations weren't had in our committee because it really was up to DDC contract rules, right? And thirdly, I'd like to address the issue of diversity. We understand for our youth, we need to have diversity. That's actually in the AYLF standards, that our staff and delegate population is representative of the racial, socioeconomic, and disability diversity of our state. So we made sure to have multiple disabilities represented on our committee, such as blindness, autism, chronic illness, etc. We also had some racial diversity. However, as you guys know, getting quorum post-COVID has been incredibly difficult. And so sometimes our committee meetings are smaller than usual. And so therefore, we don't have as much diversity or as much diversity as we really intended to have, because getting quorum and people to show up to meetings is nearly impossible these days. I'd be happy to answer any more questions that you guys have. I know that was a lot. But our committee has worked really diligently to put on a YLF that will do justice to our state.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dejan. Thank you for enlightening some of those questions.
Jill Hano has her hand raised.
Ms. Hano, you have the floor. You're recognized by the chair. And let me remind everybody, we also, I forgot to mention this in the minutes, when we open the meeting, we have 3-minute time so we can be considerate of other people's time, because we do have other meetings going. It's going to be back to back, and we don't want to intrude upon another council committee meeting. So Ms. Hano, you have the floor.
I'm just wanting to put it in record that I was on this anti-committee, and I've been a council member for quite some time, and by all the knowledge I've gained, you can't have a contract before you have a statement of proposals, because the statement, the proposal is essentially the request for a contract, and then so we as a YLF community, our job is done, and we greatly looked at the two proposals for the competing for the contract as the fiscal agent in and then the contract, once we decide on because we not given contracts to two fiscal agents, like you submit a proposal, you get the contract. That's not how that works. And another point, if that's allowed, Chairman.
Yes, it's allowed.
The contract is to, and I learned this the hard way, contracts are done in-house. So beyond us choosing FHF of Arcadia, man, I'm sorry, y'all. I don't know, but I think choosing the contractor was, or choosing the fiscal agent was kind of a stopping point for our committee, and then, like I said, the contract deals with in-house. And then I see your comments, Ms. Corley. All this we have discussed in Lillian. Am I overstepping? I'm sorry.
Hold on 1 minute before we go any further. Thank you for your comments, Ms. Haino. Still want to be considerate of time. Do we have any other committee members?
Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. Do we have any other committee members who have questions in regard to what has been this discussion in regards to the YLF contractor? Dr. McKee, I see your hand. You're recognized by the chair. You have the floor.
Greetings and good morning to everyone. I have a question for Ms. Dejan. Ms. Dejan, your recommendation is for the contract to go to Acadiana?
Ms. Dejan, you can respond.
I'm sorry. Somehow after 3 years, I'm still not good at Zoom, but yes, that would be the committee's recommendation.
Okay. And so, so typically, historically, what I have witnessed is that when a committee makes a recommendation, they're making a recommendation to the executive committee to approve their recommendation. I think in terms of the dialogue as to who gets the contract, yes, the decision is ultimately up to the committee, but it sounds like Ms. Dejan and her committee is recommending us to approve what their recommendation is. Now, I did look at the contracts. I am noticing the contract from Baton Rouge is $12,000 more than the Acadian contract. Am I reading that correctly? Is it 12,000 more? Is the proposal 12 grand more?
Amy, can you answer that?
I'm pulling it up. Let me check their budget detail.
The term is different.
So for context, the DD Council has allotted $30,000 to go to YLFs. We are anticipating funding from LRS and LDOE. The funding from LRS and LDOE will likely only be distributed once we have that fiscal agent in place. And both of
Right.
those will be based on what they can pay for based on their
Right.
own contracts with the federal government.
Right, okay, because that
So,
was my
Dr.
concern. My concern was, I noticed that Baton Rouge proposed 42,000 and Acadiana proposed 30,000.
Right, and I'm sorry, Dr. McKee, I'm looking at it so I can see right now. What they're showing is that they had, they anticipate some funds from an additional source, from some
Okay.
other source, and they were just putting that in there to show that
Okay,
they had, I guess, a commitment of funds from another source that's not the DD. So if you see in the column that's requested from DH8,
uh-huh,
it's actually $5 less than the 30,000 that the DD Council allotted them. Or
Okay.
allotted this project.
okay. And then to the other point, and first of all, I want to commend Ms. Dejan on her work. This has been a vision that Ms. Dejan has been trying to get the DD Council to even consider for at least 3 or 4 years. And so, one, we need to start with acknowledgement, the amount of work that she has put into this. It's without saying, we know that Ms. Dejan served as a DD Council member for many years, and I am confident that her recommendation is something that should be considered. Now, I don't know any contract, any person individually, no relationships with anyone. I can just speak to what I have witnessed Ms. Dejan and the work that she has done as a council member and as an individual for the past few years trying to get this together. So just for us to sit at the table and see this, folks historically may not understand, this is miraculous, to say the least. I do respect her recommendation on who she feels best to go with. I don't know anybody personally. I don't have any ties, so I do respect her recommendation. Now, with that being said, I am concerned that I am not seeing enough diversity. You know, that's what I always talk about. There's a reason why I say that. You do lack in that area. I am concerned about that. I believe that Ms. Dejan has spoken to her attempts to make sure that this is happening. I do know of people that she has reached out to serve on that YLF. So that's my position. I'm fully confident in Ms. Dejan's recommendation, and that is my position.
Thank you, Dr. McKee. Any other comment from committee, questions from committee members in regards to the discussion at hand with the YLF contract? Jill, is your hand up from the first time, or did you raise your hand again?
Again,
Okay, hold that thought 1 second. I want to check the chat before we go any further, and I'll come back to you, okay? Do we have any comments in the chat box? We do.
Okay, so Ms. Corley says the amount of funding has not been confirmed. The rubric for attending not confirmed. Black and brown individuals being on the committee did not occur. What will training look like for the staff not confirmed? Now we're talking about addressing mental health, but have not stated in what capacity and by whom. And then Lillian's response was, just FYI, we have confirmed funding from DDC. We anticipate funding from LRS and LDOE. The last 2 funding sources will be based on need. So now that we have a schedule finalized last Friday, LRS and LDOE will be able to provide more specific numbers. The rubric for attendance is pulled from the National Association for YLFs. Staff training and presenters will be determined by fiscal agent, which is why today's decision is so important. Ms. Corley responded, how will the contract be eliminated and has not been addressed? DDC only confirmed 30,000, but we still don't have confirmation from LRS and LDOE who can pull out at any time.
Thank you for that, Ms. Corley, and thank you for responding, Ms. Dejan. Ms. Hano, I see your hand. You recognize you have the floor.
I just wanted to echo what Dr. McKee says, because as a committee, we now hear me out because the first part sounds depressing, but as a committee, we go to meetings 4 times a year and we show up for a 2-hour meeting. And we get all our work done to make this YLF possible, but Lillian has been the one breathing, eating, breathing, sleeping YLF for 1 year. So again, to echo what Dr. McKee said, and just want to comment on Lillian's amazing efforts to get this YLF a part of back to Louisiana, and I'm glad I could be just a small part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hano. Dr. McKee, I see your hand. You're recognized by the chair. You have the
Thank you
floor.
so much to be recognized, Mr. Chair, and I promise I won't take up much of your time. I do hear the concerns of the public, and I am rest assured, and I'm asking the public to extend some grace as these youth and these leaders, they are trying to build something. They are working really hard to try to build something. And I'm just asking that we allow Ms. Dejan the opportunity to build this. She has worked hard. She has put together this team. And I'm asking, I know there's concerns about different issues as it relates to how we're going to get to where we need to go. But I'm asking the public to extend some grace to Ms. Dejan and her team and the years of work that they have put into place. I feel strongly that her recommendation, her committee's recommendation, is the recommendation that this executive committee should accept at this time. I do believe that these issues that the public are making us aware of, which I fully respect, I am certain that Ms. Dejan will ensure that these issues are met, that these things will happen. I am confident, and I've said that 6 times, that she will ensure that these things will take place. And so to just, to put some rest and some calm, and so they are trying to build something. And so my position again is to go along with the recommendation of the committee with the individuals that they feel is best for this contract this year. And I yield. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. McKee. Do we have any other comments from committee members, public?
Lillian and Karanda both have their hands raised.
Okay. Ms. Corley, you're recognized by the chair. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and Executive Committee, and I want to thank Dr. McKee for her statements. My frustration is not with Ms. Dejan. I do understand that that's a child. My frustration is actually that, number one, we had a committee that did not have indigenous Black and brown representation on it in any shape or form. And it was stated not only by me at every single meeting, but Ms. Polazola stated it as well, that everybody needed to address that concern, and it never got addressed. So I cannot, have frustration towards a child when we're adults, and that's what we're posed with actually addressing. But in addition to that, conflicts of interest may need to be looked at. Families Helping Families of Acadian actually sat on this ad hoc committee, and they got off on this Friday when we actually heard the solicitation of proposals of who it was being heard from. They were on there every single meeting. They sat on the committee. So it's a conflict of interest. And so when I bring up things, I want people to understand that I'm not bringing it up to be the bad guy. I'm bringing it up because it's legal and because we are already faced with the task of the federal government looking at us for not doing things as it relates to individuals with disabilities, having diversity at the forefront, having equity and equality at the forefront, as well as inclusion. And we have to be mindful of that and making sure of that. Being a parent of a child with a disability and as your national advocate, I make sure that I bring that to the forefront. I don't want any population of individuals to be excluded. And that's what's actually happening. And that's what happened with this committee. And it was not at the fault of Ms. Dejan, because again, she's a child. We are adults. And as adults, we were posed with that task and we failed.
Excuse me, Ms. Corley. For the sake of being on public record, we're going to refer to Ms. Dejan strictly by her title. We don't want to make a distinction between adulthood or anything to that point, because that can be misinterpreted as being insulting to some that's part of this council meeting.
No problem at all, Mr. Chair. As it relates to me, let me state it in a much more appropriate manner for everyone else. As it relates to me with the age to Ms. Dejan, I'm old enough to be her parent. So when I state that she's a child, she's a self-advocate that I respect. But when we look at everyone's age that is at the table, as far as in some of those that are on the executive committee and some of the staff, we're old enough to be her parent. And so I want it to be represented on that.
But Ms. Corley, I do want to recognize the level of maturity that Ms. Dejan exemplified before the council, and as well as her actions in the public as well. It's not going to be acceptable. Just understand that there's an age difference, but we're not going to be able to tolerate her to be referred to as a child, because that can be considered demeaning and insulting, because it's offensive. It's no different than somebody calling me handicapped, which I really don't like to hear, but truth, but you told that's perception what some people say. So I just want you to proceed moving forward, just talking about the business at hand, but not referring to Ms. Dejan in regard to her level of maturity. Please.
And I respect that, Mr. Chair, and I wasn't saying that in regards to her age or maturity or anything, to her level of maturity. Let me say that. I was saying that as it relates to age and how as at much older adults, we did not address that issue that I kept bringing up on more than one occasion. And that us as much older adults need to be mindful of these different committees and making sure that the representation is there. Because the representation was not there, being us as much more older or seasoned adults. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Corley. Ms. Dejan, you had your hand up, but I see that it's gone down, so I'm assuming that you're within the floor. Ms. Haino, you've already had an opportunity to present your point 3 times. At this point, I just want to see if we have any more questions. I see you, Ms. Haino, but given the temperament of this and the fact that we're getting ready to move into a decision moving forward to the proposal, do we have any more discussion in regards to this? Because I'm ready to entertain a motion in regard to the proposal for YLF contract.
Yeah.
Nicole Banks has her hand raised.
Vice Chair Banks, I see your hand, you're recognized by the chair, you got the floor.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. So can I make a motion? Is it time?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
so I make a motion that we accept Ms. Dejaron's recommendation that they presented to the council today. In regards, yeah, thank you.
We have a motion on the floor in regard to the proposal for wireless.
There are no comments in the chat or hands raised.
Do we have a second?
I'm sorry, I'll second that. I'll second it.
All right. So it's been moved and second. It's been moved by Vice Chair Banks. It's been seconded by Dr. McKee in regards to accepting the proposal for the wireless contractor. Are you ready for question?
Any objection?
Are there any objections? Do we have any abstentions?
I abstain because Bayou Land Families Helping Families submitted a letter of recommendation and I sit on their board.
So Ms. Bazil will be abstaining for conflict of interest. All in favor of accepting the motion by saying aye?
Aye.
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 Any opposition? Sounds unanimous.
Motion passes.
Motion passes and it is adopted. Thank you so much. Also, I would like to say, Ms. Dejan, thank you so much for your tireless efforts that you put forth in making sure that this wildlife comes to pass. I do know also as a chair that you've given a lot of tireless time in trying to make sure that this is something that Louisiana has an opportunity to utilize. And just echoing what Dr. McKee said and Ms. Hano said, more than confident that with the issues that have been brought forth today and concerns moving forward, that those will be addressed, because I do know you to be someone that will dot our I's and cross our T's, and I thank you for it. Also, I appreciate the level of maturity that you exemplify as a leader in our community, and the fact that you're so vigilant into making sure that we have appropriate programs for our young adults transitioning into adulthood and to another level of maturity so that they can be advocates and at some point succeed us on this UD council in the chair and in advocate. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity, especially as I transition into adulthood, to be able to empower youth like me.
Thank you again. Now, council committee members, we're going to review the legislative agenda item. You should have been able to access the two documents through the link on the proposed agenda. The first document is for the 2023 legislative kickoff advocacy agenda and agenda recommendation. Mr. Bill, please bring that document up on. Is everyone able to see the agenda, the legislative kickoff advocacy agenda recommendations? Do we want to read them or just? Or do you want some of them?
Maybe just for some background info. These recommendations are generated by the LACAN leaders who hold community input meetings in their regions and allow the public input into their recommendations for our legislative advocacy agenda. Those recommendations are then combined and gone over with all of LACAN. I believe we had over 130 recommendations that we sifted through. We had conversations about. LACAN leaders voted and ranked, and these three that are displayed most clearly are the three that rose to the top of their recommendations for inclusion in our legislative advocacy agenda. So the first one is for funding for incontinence supplies for adults to be covered by Medicaid We think by a waiver amendment would probably be the easiest way for that to happen. This particular issue is one that the ARC is also pursuing, and so we would be able to collaborate with them. And they have been working on getting some numbers together on a fiscal note. We don't have that yet. We have asked the department for some information, but it is tricky for them to gather because adult briefs and diapers are not currently covered, so they don't really have much to base numbers off of. And then we're also kind of asking for some additional items like wipes and pads. So that's that first item. The second item, I'm so sorry, guys. The second item is legislate clear guidelines and protocols for school districts to follow as it relates to ABA being provided in schools, offering ABA intervention in the classroom. There is currently a bill, and I don't know the number of it, but Brenton might, that allows ABA to be provided in schools. This issue is really about ABA therapists being able to go directly into classrooms. And then the third item is continuation of the additional $500,000 in state general funds for the Families Helping Families. And it says if not included in the council budget, and I can confirm it has been taken out. LDH gently commanded that I remove it from my budget request again this year. So those are the top three. Brenton, if you have any additional information you need to give.
No, I mean, those are the ones that are their recommendations. You had mentioned the act for ABA, it's Act 696, if anyone was interested.
Thank you for that. Before we go any further, considering that we do have new council members that are present, and also we have a public who may be tuning in, sometimes there may be questions. The legislative agenda item is not saying that all of these are dismissive. It's just the fact of the matter is we just try to address those that we feel that would be the most beneficial in systemic change. So we know that there are some items that are passionate to everybody, but I just want to let you know that it's not dismissive. Again, we just look at the core things that are going to be beneficial with systemic change. And also it's a great benefit to know that we also have other advocacy agencies that are benefiting, that are advocating for the same thing, because those collaborations make the voice much louder when it comes down to talking to our legislators to try to make sure that we can get these agendas become reality for our populations. So thank you for that. But I wanted to preference that just in case there was someone wondering how come we just are discussing three as opposed to all of those that were presented.
Rashad, if I may, one thing just for consideration is this upcoming session is a fiscal only session. So they're typically going to address matters of funding. So funding, taxes, things of that nature. Each legislator has, I think it's 5 bills max that they can bring that are not fiscal related. So anything that you do that is not fiscal related, you have to understand that you're vying for a spot on a legislator's agenda as well, for them to bring forth some sort of legislation on your behalf, whether you're trying to modify or amend a piece of legislation or create a new piece of legislation. So that's something to consider whenever you're looking at these recommendations. Also in the packet, you were given all of the recommendations. Like Amy said, there were over 130 received. Once we started doing duplicates, it's about 100 that you received. So you actually have all the information. The 3 up there are strictly just recommendations, but you ultimately can decide what you want to move forward. You know, I just wanted to also share that information about legislative session, so you'll know that it's a little bit different this year. It is a shorter session, and so they're really only focusing on fiscal matters. You have very limited opportunity for other things.
Thank you for clarification. Are there any questions from committee members?
Jill has her hand raised.
Ms. Haino, you recognize, you have the floor.
For 5 years, I have been meaning to ask y'all, what does like, I know, like, this is obviously priority 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but then what is, like, I'm assuming these up and down numbers. So
Okay, you're
there's
asking,
no,
I'm sorry, you're asking
um,
about the column, the numbers in the column and the priorities and how they were ranked, is that what you're asking?
yeah, what? I still don't know the difference between vertical and horizontal dyslexia. Thank you.
Not a problem, I have the staff to answer that question for you. The
But
enlightening.
so
Ms. Haynow.
what do the like 1, 4, 0, the other numbers mean?
Yeah, Jill, if you look below that chart, it gives you a breakdown of how the information was developed. So the priority,
Below that chart.
a priority 1 to 5 is essentially what the leaders and FHF directors are looking at for each issue. So
Okay,
whenever we get all these issues in, they determine if they think 1, it's a statewide issue, and 2, is it something that can be legislatively fixed? And for
right,
those particular issues, they look at a priority. So priority 1 would be the highest priority. This is something we really need to address now. Down to priority 5, which means it's a very low priority. That's probably something that we're not looking at. And so the way that we came up with this is pretty much any of the priority 1s and 2s where we had about 5 or more that said it was a priority. Those are the ones that they looked at to consider as possible legislative agenda items. And then from there, they can go and try to make a case as to why other items that maybe didn't rank as high should be considered in their recommendation. But that's what those priorities are. Basically, we just wanted to make sure you had all the information so you see how they ranked for the priority. And whenever you go, I think below the process, there's also a percentage. You could see the percentage of how it actually was broken down as far as the votes for each particular issue. And then after that are all the issues that we received where you can see if they considered it a statewide issue, a legislative fix, and how they ranked all of the different priority items. So pretty much everything that we included in there is to help you kind of make a decision of what you think might be the best priorities for the council to tackle.
so then, like, cause the open meetings laws got 4s where the hiding got 1s. So does that mean more people prioritize open meetings law over fundings for incontinent products?
Not necessarily. So we looked at
Okay,
how priority 1 and 2 ranked. So we didn't necessarily look at, do you have a higher priority 1 or higher priority 2? We took the total of each. So they could actually start discussions. So everything that you see in that first chart, like the ones that are underneath the gray highlighted areas, those are the ones out of all 100+ issues were their highest priority issues. And then they started debating within those issues, what should they actually recommend to the council? If I recall, and I could be wrong, the open meetings law, part of that discussion was also, this is a fiscal only session. So we weren't looking to really tackle something that wasn't necessarily fiscally related. I mean, there were other concerns. There's also some resolutions that were done this past session. You know, we also get feedback that ADA should trump state law anyway. So there's also that battle of why open meetings laws, depending on the department, may not be as accommodating. So there were a lot of factors that go into each particular issue that they discussed.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Andrews. Dr. McKee, I see your hand. You're recognized by the chair. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for being recognized. And thank you, Britton, for answering to that point, because I was going to ask about open meetings law. I just don't understand why that would not be a priority, regardless if there's funding tied to it or not. And I know that in the past, we usually would get 3, but we can also have a conversation about adding 1 or 2 more. We're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm very concerned that that is not something that, even though there's no funding tied to it, we should be advocating for a change in open meetings law, so everyone should have access to being a part of this conversation and being a part of what we're doing. And so my position is that that needs to be there regardless if there's funding tied to it or not. And maybe someone can explain that to me, why that's I understand why it's a 4, but I still believe that needs to be a 1. Like, I really am not comfortable with not allowing people access to be a part of what we're doing in terms of systemic change, particularly as when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, like my fellow council member, Johanna mentioned. The other question I have is that I see a constant mainstay, and I believe that by me making this comment, I may not be in favor, may not be viewed favorably, but it seems every year we're getting this $500,000 continuation of funding for FHF. And again, I recognize that, the work that FHF does for the community, what they've done for many years. And I do hold FHF near and dear to me as well. But my concern is that this is a constant mainstay of requests from the DDC, and that other issues are not getting the opportunity to get funding. Or other issues are not being ranked as a priority for advocacy for LADDC. This is a constant mainstay. And so I would like for us to possibly get some more information from FHF as to, okay, is this going to be something that's going to be on the advocacy agenda every year for LADDC? And what are the plans moving forward so that other issues can be afforded the opportunity to gain the level of advocacy that the LADDC offers. To my third point, I would like to get some more clarification. I know about 696, but I would like to get some more. Can y'all move the screen back down so I can get to the top 3 we were talking about? Right. And so I'm wondering to find out exactly specifically what this issue and what LADDC needs to do in terms of the advocacy. I am aware of there was some challenges with 696 and making sure the ABA was clearly outlined in there, but what is the ask? What are the clear guidelines? What are the asks that is being wanting LADDC advocacies, particularly for this ABA? Can someone speak to that? What's the clear ask?
So Dr. McKee, we have those same concerns. We have been working with people that have been working in the school system, and we're just as confused about the ask as well. So we don't know what the clear ask would be for this particular item. Similar to the cameras in the classrooms, this act was more so for the districts to create their own policies. So it's more like there needs to be regional advocacy or like district level advocacy. And I don't know if it would be correct for us to do it statewide, because ABA is supposed to be individualized in their IEPs. And so if we take a statewide stance, it will create something that's not individualized for each student, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense, Ms. Haven, because I'm very cautious about giving districts any autonomy to make up their own decisions, because as we've seen, that results in inequity. And guess what? I'm on the record saying that it's true. I think we do need something that's statewide, like a standard of practice that all of the districts must follow. So I would see that being an ask of the LADDC to get behind something that will be statewide or all the districts to follow. But to ask the LADDC to get behind autonomy, to allow school districts to have the autonomy to do what they want to do, I'm not for that at all. That's not even a conversation. But again, to circle back, I do need some clarity about this constant $500,000 every year that's being asked for the LADDC to get behind. I would like to see what FHF's position is about what's going to be happening moving forward. Like, is this going to be a constant ask for the LADDC? Because there are other issues that our communities bring up that I believe deserve attention from LADDC for advocacy. So in terms of the priorities right now, if we have to make a decision, I'm not in favor of any of them except maybe the first one. So I'll just come out there and say, I need more information on the two about ABA, and I need more information about the 500,000 FHF centers continuation of general fund. I need some specifics on that. This is a constant mainstay every year, sustained, and why that amount every year? Something needs to, we need to find out, because I have other issues that we can advocate for. So that's the position. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know I went over the time. Thank you again, Ms. Avon.
Thank you, Dr. McKee. Ms. Polozola, you had your hand raised. You were recognized by the chair. You have the floor.
Yeah, I just wanted to address a few things. In regards to the open meetings, there is a legislative committee that is meeting. Actually, they were very interested in the way the DD Council hosts their meetings to look at potentially looking at that model for the state model. So there may be people watching to see how we operate. And so I think that potentially, and it seemed like everyone who was on that committee, whenever they met for the first time, was really positive and wanting to change the open meetings laws to be able to be more open to the public. So I think that even though it's not a fiscal item, I feel that someone may author some legislation around that. In regards to the 500,000 for families helping families, I absolutely always support funding for our Families Helping Family Centers, but I think that maybe that potentially could be done by getting with the Commissioner of Administration and getting that in the budget now, so it doesn't require advocacy. Because once it's in there, I don't feel like we're in a financial state in our state now that's going to be stripped. You know, like if we were in some type of budget crisis, maybe that would happen, but I haven't heard that is the issue. So if we can get them to put that money in the budget, state budget now, then maybe that wouldn't require a lot of advocacy. It's, no one's going to strip it out, I wouldn't think. The other thing is stripped from my budget request. It was this year and last year. And last year I did go to the commissioner and ask for it to remain in, and it still got stripped.
Okay, so maybe we can do some other.
I do think that if the FHF, this is just my opinion, if the FHF additional funds is on our legislative agenda, the ask needs to be for recurring funds and not 1 year funds, which was the issue with last year's funds. All that the committees were entertaining were one-time funds. I think we need to ask for recurring, and then if we get it, this is not an issue every year.
The other thing is that last year we were successful in one of our advocacy items about the post-secondary inclusive education. That is moving forward. They met on Monday. Amy's on that committee. And 12 universities and community colleges across the state that currently don't have programs are interested in starting a program. One of the issues is sustainability. So $1 million doesn't go that far. And so as they're planning, they need 2 to 3 years of sustained, whatever that funding is, if it's 50,000, 75,000, and that really can't be done with $1 million. So I think that if we want to see that success, really the success, we have to have some advocacy to say, put some money in over a larger pot to where we can show for 2 or 3 years and then show the data of the success with that investment in type of programs. So that's just another item of funding that I think is important.
Thank you, Ms. Polozola. Do we have any more questions from committee members before I go to the public?
I've had one more thing that I meant to say in regard to the ABA. I think that the real issue of that is that we put things in legislation that the districts are supposed to put in place. And what they do is, many of them is find every way not to put it in place.
Correct.
In my parish, I sat in a meeting last week with people in the school board, people appraisal who are dear friends to me, provided services to my son, and they acted like they didn't understand how ABA would impact students in their classrooms. And it was like the BCBA was telling them this new miracle that just happened. And I know these people were in trainings with me over a decade ago about it. And so they still don't have an MOU in place in the parish I live in.
I'm dealing with the same thing in the parish I live in.
So we need the Department of Education to have authority to hold them accountable for things like this, for cameras in the classrooms, for so many other issues. So I think that's the bigger picture. I don't know if that's something that the DD Council wants to tackle, but I think that, in my opinion, is the root of the issue. Because we have good laws in place around these things. It's just they're not being implemented and not being held accountable to do it.
Implementation and enforcement is one of the biggest concerns, issues, challenges that we have now. Mr. Andrews, I saw your hand. You recognized by the chair. You had the floor.
Yeah, there was just, Dr. McKee had mentioned something about the open meetings law that jogged my memory of part of the discussion. So I just wanted to tack onto that because Bambi was mentioning that particular item. But as far as representation of individuals with DD and diversity of public bodies, we did have a lot of conversation around that particular item. One of the barriers we ran into was trying to find or come up with a clear pathway for a legislative fix, because these bodies, your public bodies, the makeup of that body is dictated by the bylaws of each particular body itself and not necessarily in law. So we didn't really have a clear picture at that time when we were discussing of how we could move forward with a general legislation that would dictate each particular body within this state of what their makeup would be. I think there would have to be a lot more research done on our part to be able to go in, because at that point, we probably have to start looking at each individual public body and start dictating legislatively for each body what they should do if we're going to go against what their bylaws are saying. Like our bylaws, for instance, tell us specifically what we should have, and that it should be what the public bodies have as well. Now, whether their bylaws are any good, that would be debatable, but we don't have all the bylaws. Kind of similar to the ABA, we don't have all the ABA policies that these districts have put out in place for us to know who's doing well and who's not doing well. But I just wanted to throw that in there. I didn't want to jump in when Dr. McKee was talking about it, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, thank you for that. And also, let me redirect real quick. We don't want to run over time because we still have Act 378 committee, which is going to be at 10:15. And the challenge we run into with the meeting, we're using the same Zoom. So you got to make sure that we do clear, make it. So with that being said, I'm gonna move in to see if we have any more comments. Dr. McKee, I apologize. I have my back turned. I didn't see your hand. You're recognized by the chair.
That's okay. I'll be real quick. Thank you, Brenton. But that's what you have to do. That's my comment. That's what you have to do. That's what we do. We advocate for change. And so if we do have to look at every single bylaw, if we do have to read and see if people are actually utilizing diversity, equity, inclusion practices in their bylaws, if that is something we have to do the research to get the state and to advocate for that, that's what you have to do. That's what you call real systems change. And so thank you for making that comment, but that's the work we need to do. We need to do that because all of these councils and these boards need to be representative of represent the people that we serve. So guess what? We still have a lot of work to do. So thank you for making that comment. So that's what we need to do. Look at all of them. Check out all the bylaws. Make sure that they're actually doing what we need to be doing for this state. I yield.
Thank you, Dr. McKee. At this point, we're going to look and see if we don't have any other committee members with any questions. Let's look at the public comment.
Charlie Michelle has.
I apologize.
No, I'm just ready. I have to go. Hi there. I'm Charlie Michelle. I am an aged parent of 2 children with disabilities. I am currently the executive director of Bioland Families Helping Families, And I'm a retired educator with 11 years of experience as a special ed director. I bring all that up.
Charlie, can you come up just a little bit, just to make sure that they hear you.
Okay, there you go. I bring all that up because I've been juggling for many years, trying to hide a lantern of parent when I was working with the school system, hiding it so it didn't come in conflict, trying to hide the lantern of being special ed director when I'm working as the executive director of BioLand, so that that doesn't come in conflict. And I realized after I was looking at this second item here, all lanterns need to be shining brightly. So what I'm going to offer is some information from all of those experiences. I didn't even think about that this is a legislative session that's dealing with finances, which is going to make that second item much more difficult to get into a very crowded field. But the other thing is when you look at all of the issues that school districts are facing, I have looked at the law that mandates that every school system write a policy to deal with ABA in the classroom. I have, as executive director, I've looked at some of those policies in our region because we get so many complaints consistently. Every policy is different, and most of them are checking the box that they've complied, but they do not serve the intent of that law. So what I would suggest that maybe we want to wait until we have a better chance of getting it on. But if we pursue this now or in the future, I do believe that it needs to be what Bambi said and what Hyacinth said. We don't want to give the districts the leeway to make a rule, the guidelines that they see fit or appropriate. The State Department of Ed should be charged with creating regulations and guidelines for that, and charged with receiving complaints, and charged with monitoring the implementation of that law. And it needs to be done in such a way that individuality can still be worked into the plan for the child. Now, I'm going to say, I don't know that ABA would ever be included in an IEP in most school districts, because ABA is a very specific process to modify behaviors. It's very effective, but it's very specific. In IEPs, they might say something about behavior intervention, and they would talk about what the goals are, what are the objectives, how will they achieve it. But once that is discussed in the IEP meeting, then it's up to the school district to decide how they are going to meet those goals and objectives. Many school districts have, in Lafourche, we had a wealth, almost an embarrassment of wealth, with psychologists and social workers that were trained in strategies for behavior management. A lot of those strategies are included in ABA, but they're not trained in ABA, so they couldn't be considered ABA interventions. Some school districts don't have that luxury. So the policy that's put at the state level can be and should be individualized. That way, it actually supports the school districts who don't have the resources, because they can pull people in to do ABA for students that need it. When you look at some of the policies, and again, I've not looked around the state, just in our region, you've got a disparity. You've got ABA people that are allowed in there hours at a time in the classroom. You've got some districts that allow the kids to be pulled out. Well, that's not real good academically, because when you learn in isolation a behavior, when you get put back into the original place, it's not always generalized. And you've got some districts that will allow them in their 15 minutes. ABA doesn't work like that. No behavioral intervention works like that. So I would maintain that perhaps if we want to address this year or next, that we actually look at what we're trying to do and we get the State Department of Ed on board, because I think they'll be resistant. And that's not a negative statement. That's a statement because I don't know that they have the manpower or the expertise to be able to do that. So I think maybe we could do a collaborative thing with State Department of Ed, whose representative, I believe, is on the full council. So we can do something like that. But I don't think we have enough information other than that it's not being done well. And I think we're going to end up with yet another camera in the classroom thing. We have a policy, we have a law that says a policy must be done, and they've done it. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. So just like Hyacinth was talking about the continuation of FHF funds, is this something we're going to be doing all year? It's the dog chasing the tail. We need to catch our tail and figure out what we're going to do with it. That's my opinion. And I'll say that about the ABA. On the continuation of the $500,000, I agree with everything everybody said. And as far as one of the things, we have such high expenses that have never been addressed in any of the contracts that we've done, but it costs more and more. We are planning on getting a recap of the things that we've done with the monies, because they've been so incredibly helpful. And I'm just going to speak from my center, but in our center, we went from barely being able to make the deliverables because we live in a very rural area to we've more than doubled the number of parents and professionals that we've been able to deliver trainings to. And I will say that is directly attributable to that $500,000. I didn't hire anybody, but we're doing more 504 trainings. We're doing it statewide. All of us are doing it statewide. So there is definitely a benefit analysis that we can do with this, but also it helps us to increase our salaries for the employees. And if we lose funding from any agency, whether it's this one or any other agency, in my instance, I'll either have to cut hours. I won't cut pay, but I'll have to cut hours or cut personnel. And there are lots of things we're doing in our community that we're doing more outreach. We're just doing more. I understand the concern, and I know it's annoying to see that on there every year. But we are trying, hopefully, that it'll get to be permanent. So I thought your suggestion and yours was really, really good. So that's all I've got. I'll answer any questions about the ABA thing. You know, my answer is about the 500,000 is going to be yes, please. But if there's anything about ABA that I can offer you some assistance on, as far as understanding why it's going to be a problem in the classroom. And the other thing I want to bring up, I'm sorry, ABA, I'll be done in just a minute. The other thing about ABA, if we will recall back in the day when this first one was passed, there was no resistance from the Superintendent's Association, the School Boards Association, very little, because that was then passed through the Health and Welfare Committee, not the Education Committee. So there were no little red flags going up because ABA is truly a medical model. So if we're going to pursue this now or in the future, we need to consider doing the same thing, but we also need to be prepared for pushback from teachers' organizations, from superintendents associations, school board associations. And it's not that they don't want kids to get what they need in the classroom. Teachers are worried that if you bring extra adults into the classroom, or if you take the child out of the classroom, their livelihood depends on the evaluation. Their livelihood depends on students getting the instruction and demonstrating mastery of that. And if anything disrupts that, even for a good reason, it puts the teacher's career in jeopardy. So that's why you get some pushback from teacher organizations, but it will be brutal pushback. So just keep that in mind because I think we need time to plan for that. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the insight. Thank you very much. Okay, with that being said, let's look at, we have any public comments in regards to the discussion at hand with the legislative agenda.
Would you like me to go through and read them?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
From Ms. Karanda Corley, she says, what are the proposed outlines regarding Act 696 and 117 regarding ABA? She continues by saying, doesn't Act 378 cover the hygiene supplies? And why is FHF asking for this amount? Do you want me to continue?
Oh, right there. Go back up to Ms. Corley's comments. Okay. I think we answered majority of them. I know Dr. Michelle just answered that about the family helping family. I think he put that in pretty good context. I think he put that in context about ADA. Proposed outlines regarding 696 and 117. Did we discuss that one?
Oh, that's the ABA.
That's ABA, okay, thank you. And Act 378, doesn't Act 378 cover the hygiene supplies?
So the individual and family supports and services, you can get hygiene supplies through that. However, what they're proposing is for it to be covered under the waiver, just like the dental services that got passed last year that we advocated for. So for those diapers and all of those supplies to just be covered under the waiver. So that's what the proposal is.
Okay, thanks for that clarity. You can go to the next comments, please.
Okay. I don't want to say your name wrong. Yaisha, Ms. McFarland, we'll go with that. In reference to direct workers training requirements, have they increased, especially in home environments? Salary reviewed, has the funding increased for these workers? Have any of the above been done for these workers since the cost of living and work expectations have increased? And then she said, clarification, ABA are not required to be a part of IEP because this is totally up to the family and their own insurance and personal money funds these services.
I know there hasn't been an increase, especially with the cost of inflation going up for the most part, so that's something that have to be looked at.
Just a clarification, our DSW rates have increased substantially over the past 6 years. I mean, the rates that are going to providers and then the base rates that have to be paid. So that there has been not in this year, depending on when you're talking about, but in 6 years, it's gone up almost 50%, the reimbursement, which is a huge amount of increase in the rates, although I advocate for them to be paid more, but it has increased.
Thanks for that clarity. And in today's economy, by the time you do get an increase, inflation offsets it where you're right back where you were if you're not sliding $2 behind. Who is that, Hannah?
Yeah, that's right.
Please proceed, Hannah.
Okay. Miss Melinda Elliott says, the problem with ABA is in several school systems, they do have policy. The policy is to only allow the BCBA access to the child in a room by themselves for 30 minutes once a week. My understanding, this was not the legislative intent. ABA and mental health services work better across environments. So what is done at home is done at school, is done in the community. 30 minutes once a week in a room by themselves is almost nothing. A minimum policy by LDOE would be hugely helpful.
Which is something Dr. Michelle just pretty much addressed. Okay, Ms. Jenkins, please proceed.
Okay, from Ashley McReynolds. She says, as nonprofits, I think that FHF should take the lead on their additional funding and have LaCan support their effort.
Okay, thank you for that.
And Cynthia Posey says, I represent the Louisiana Federation of Teachers and am happy to work with the Louisiana Developmental Disabilities Council on the ABA issue. And then she gave her cell phone number in the chat.
Thank you, Ms. Posey. Does that conclude all of our comments, Ms. Jenkins?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you for that. Not seeing any hands raised from committee members and addressing our public comment. In regard to the legislative advocacy recommendation, what I hear from the committee? Dr. McKee, I see your hand, you recognize, you have the floor.
I'm prepared for a motion.
Okay, you may proceed.
Motion for the LADDC to provide advocacy surrounding issue number 1, funding for hygiene incontinent products for adults to be covered by Medicaid.
One by one. Or all together.
Just for the sake of understanding, is this complete?
I'm gonna do it one by one because I need these other ones I'm still struggling with. So
Okay,
can we address the first one?
Okay, thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure before.
It's okay. Yeah, I know. It's okay.
Move forward. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor in regard to issue number 1, the funding for hygiene. Dr. McKee moves to provide advocacy around issue number 1. Do we have a second?
Kim Bazile will second.
It's been seconded by Ms. Kim Bazile. Do we have any questions? Ready to move forward with a vote? Do we have any objections? Do we have anyone that's going to abstain? Abstention? All in favor?
Aye.
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 It's unanimous, motion passed. Thank you so much. Now, in regards to the legislative agenda, next item, I'm willing to entertain a motion or a discussion. Ms. Hayno, I see your hand raised. You recognize?
Very sorry, Rashad, and if you want me to watch this on YouTube later, I get it, but I was dealing with something else and I missed the whole ABA conversation. Can I have like literally one or two sentences on to brief me, or should I just hit the YouTube button?
No, just stand by, because this is gonna be important because we're gonna move forward with the council meeting tomorrow.
Okay.
Just for the sake of clarity, Mr. Andrew, can you give some insight on that real quick for Ms. Hayno in regards to the
I'm
ADA?
sorry, y'all. Maintenance people banged on my door because the wind blew my trash out of the bag.
It's not a problem. Can someone give a summation? Dr. McKee, I see your hand. You're still just 1 minute. I'm gonna recognize you. Can someone please give clarity for Ms. Hayno about the legislative issue by ADA within about a 2-minute summation?
I mean, I think it's difficult to do because we heard the viewpoints from public members.
I'll get it later, like it's full count. I got YouTube. I'll get the summary. I got the transcript.
Okay, I'll tell you what, Ms. Hayno, just
we'll be
hold.
talking about this for the next year. Good.
Okay, hold on 1 minute, Ms. Hayno. Let me recognize Dr. McKee. To see let me recognize Dr. McKee. Dr. McKee, you're recognized. You have the floor.
Ready for another motion?
Yes, ma'am.
Want to make sure that we motion for the open meetings law. I need to pull it up. Even though this is a funding year, I still believe that the LADDC should provide advocacy surrounding and ensuring that people with disabilities have access to open meetings, be it virtual, in person. And I don't see the wording on the screen because the priority is like at 175%. But I want to be able to read that issue. Can someone shrink this? Like I can't manipulate. Thank you so much. Yeah, so advocacy around, okay. Motion to LADDC to advocate changing the open meetings law to increase representation of individuals with IDD and ensure diversity of public bodies. Now we could add that second one to it or make it a standalone legislative agenda, but that will be up to the committee with the full council. So the advocacy would be changing the open meeting law to address representation of individuals with IDD, to ensure diversity of public bodies, and to include virtual meetings as a standard means of public input for the IDD community.
I second the motion.
So let me restate and say I move to.
I thought you did that, Dr. McKee. I'm sorry.
I missed it. And a fairy just popped up and reminded me. Thank you, fairy. A good fairy.
No problem.
So that's what it would be stated as.
Okay.
And then I have another motion after that. I'm just prepared to make motions on the legislative agenda. So you guys just let me know when you're ready.
Okay. I'm just waiting on it to come up, so I'll make sure I read it properly, accordingly into the record. Okay, so we have Dr. McKee moves for the LADDC to provide, oh, excuse me, wrong one. Dr. McKee moves to include change open meeting law to increase representation of individuals with IDD and ensure diversity of public bodies and change of open meetings law to include virtual meetings as a standard of public input for the IDD committee. It was moved by Dr. McKee, was second by Vice Chairman Banks. Do we have any question?
Is there any way we could change? Instead of saying virtual, say hybrid, just to include it's both?
I can
Dr.
amend
McKee, are
that.
you okay
If
with
that,
that?
I'm willing to amend that, that motion. So I move to include change open meetings law to increase representation of individuals with IDD and ensure diversity of public bodies by changing the opens meeting law to include hybrid meetings as a standard means of public input for IDD community in the legislative agenda. I don't have a problem with amending that word to hybrid.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we have an amended motion to change open meetings law to increase representation of individuals with IDD to ensure diversity of public bodies to include the hybrid meetings as a standard of public input in the community and legislative advocacy by Dr. McKee. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
It's been seconded by Ms. Bazile. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any objections?
Jill has her hand raised.
Ms. Hano, you have your hand raised?
My hand raised was an aye because it took
Okay,
so long to unmute.
okay, no problem. So this is gonna be,
Acceptable?
no, this is unanimous. And also, while you're unmuted, Ms. Hano, I'm gonna go ahead and address that about what we're saying about ABA. To sum it up, one of the challenges that they're having with ABA is to try to make sure that the services can be provided in the schools, but it always boils back down to the district, the school district, doing their due diligence as making sure that that does happen. And sometimes the trick is making sure we have the right language in the presented so that it can be more enforced as opposed to being something on the books. So that's what basically in summation what that was about ABA. I'm trying to answer your question. I hope that brings clarity. Does it?
Yes, sir, thank you. Are
Okay.
there any current laws regarding ADA?
Yes.
696.
Yes.
Act 696, Jill, I'll have to get the year because I'm not too sure about it.
18.
Brenton said he thinks it's 2018. Act 696 from 2018.
Act 696.
Okay, being time conscious, moving forward, we also have, do we have anything else from committee members in regards to any kind of motions? Dr. McKee, I see your hand raised, you're recognized.
Motion for the continuation of additional funding, but to be, Amy said it, and Bambi said it too. So that
funds.
recurring funds, thank you. I'll pull back on that. Scratch that from the record.
So you're not presenting a motion, Dr. McKee?
I'm not presenting a motion on that issue right now.
Okay. Do we have any other comments or from the council members? Hybrid or in room?
I don't see any hands raised.
So to my understanding, we have 2 legislative agenda items that we're going to present in the council meeting tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay. So the next item of business, thank you so much for your time on this one. Next item of business is discussion on training for full council on DEI practices. Dr. McKee, yeah, your hand is raised. You're recognized by the chair. You have the floor.
If I'm being recognized, thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, I asked for this to be added as an agenda item. It is important that the full council receive training on diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. This is something that was brought to the attention, I believe, almost 2 years ago from the DEI committee, as well as other concerns from council members. And although people may believe or feel that they understand fully DEI practices, let me just point out the way that we even engage in dialogue on these calls with each other is often very shocking and off-putting. And if it was seen from a lens of someone who was trained in DEI practices, they would say to us, we need training. Our verbal language, our nonverbal language, the way we address each other in meetings, the way we address people by not acknowledging the way they wish to be addressed, just speaks volumes of how we need full training on DEI practices. I will say that 2 of our staff members did take it upon themselves to attend some DEI training last year, and they're commended on their efforts for doing that, as they were not required or it was not asked for them to do so. But at this point, I believe that the full council needs training on DEI practices. And so my motion is to request that the full council receive training on diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. And that also be a requirement for membership on the council. We are in times now where we need to be culturally informed, culturally humbled, when we are engaging in dialogue with each other. That is the motion. And maybe I should put by a deadline, because what I've learned is that when we motion things, just as it was stated earlier, oftentimes we motion things and they just sit for years and years. So let me make a deadline that the full council be trained by April of 2023.
Dr. McKee, can you review the motion on the screen and make sure that it is worded correctly?
So let's see, Dr. McKee motions that the full LADDC receives training on DEI practices by April of 2023, that it become a mandatory training for new members on the council. Looks fine to me.
If I can just include one note, one issue that we have with making things mandatory, especially as it relates to training for council members, is because everyone is governor appointed, we can call something mandatory, but there's no consequence to back up if someone does not attend. You can't remove someone. And our bylaws currently don't allow any structure for that type of removal. So I just wanted to make that note clear so that people understood. We can call it mandatory, but it won't have a lot of teeth behind it.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you so much, Amy. And once we work on this motion, then I'll propose another one to address what you just said. Thank you so much.
I'm gonna make this comment real quick, but I would hope, just because the individual does sit on this council, they would want to do their due diligence to become just as well-rounded in this diversity, with this, to make sure that even if it's not mandatory, there'll be enough interest to want to be a part of this, because not only for the council and the public that we live in, society we live in, would be very helpful to have. But with that being said, I did see your hand, Vice Chair Banks, but hold that for just a minute, because we do have a motion on the floor now. And the motion that the full council receive training on DEI practice by April of 2023, and that it become mandatory training for new council members. Do we have a second?
I second it.
Okay, it's been moved by Dr. McKee. It's been seconded by Vice Chair Nicole Banks. Any objections? All in favor by saying aye?
Aye.
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 Okay, it's unanimous. Motion passes. Thank you. Now, Vice Chair Banks, I saw your hand. You're recognized by the chair. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. I just want to go back to the agenda because on the agenda it states that we were supposed to discuss the legislative advocacy recommendation submitted by the public, and we didn't really address that. Yeah, we did. We kind of missed that. We went into the discussion of the training of the full council or whatever. So I know we discussed the legislative kickoff recommendations, but then there's another one, the legislative advocacy recommendations submitted by the public.
So that we did discuss it, Nicole. If you remember, Brenton kind of went over like how we got, how the LaCan leaders collected the input. So that came from the public. That's just linked to the agenda so that everyone has access to all the issues that were submitted by the LaCan leaders.
Okay.
So he kind of went over how we went through the process for the kickoff with the LaCan leaders and the FHF directors. So do you have any other questions about it?
No.
Just there so everybody has access to every issue that was submitted by those membership meetings that the LaCan leaders held in their regions.
Okay, that's okay. So it just ties into the other report that we read, and yeah, even going over it, it has some of the issues and what's prioritized and what wasn't prioritized. Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. McKee.
My hand's up for motions. I'm in a motion mood. I got 3 minutes.
All right, you have the floor.
I move that our bylaws be reviewed to include that we have language that is inclusive of diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, specifically as it relates to requirements for members to hold seats on the council.
Okay. You have a motion on the floor by Dr. McKee for the bylaws to be reviewed, to review the language. And
let me share it because again, I need to make sure that.
Yeah, I want to make sure I recite that correctly. We have a motion on the floor by Dr. McKee that the bylaws be reviewed to include that we have language that is inclusive of diversity, equity, and inclusion practice, specifically as it relates for members to hold seats on the council. Do I have a second?
I second that.
Okay, it's been seconded by Vice Chair Nicole Banks. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Open meetings law requires that, now if you don't need discussion from the council, that's fine, but it requires that you have open comments before any vote.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for the clarification, Ms. Liston. Do you have any public comments, Ms. Orr?
Ms. Karanda Corley has her hand raised.
Ms. Corley, you're recognized by the chair. You have the floor.
Great morning, Council Chair and Executive Committee. I am in approval, strong approval of these two motions. I hope that the next motion be that y'all make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is included in the training for all those that receive contracts from the DD Council as well, because that is something that is being pushed, that is being seen in all of the state entities, and considering that our DD Council staff work for LDH and not necessarily our council, I strongly encourage it. I encourage that diversity, equity, and inclusion always be at the forefront, always. That is the reason why we are in the federal trouble that we are in. And I really hope that we continue to make diversity, equity, inclusion at the forefront of everything that our DD Council do, because disability does not care about race, ethnicity, religious belief, socioeconomic status, rural or urban living, etc. It does not care, and it always needs to be an issue, always. Thank you, and I strongly approve this motion.
Okay, thank you for your voice of support. Do we have any other comment from the public?
No other
Ms. Jenkins?
hands raised or comments in the chat.
Okay, Dr. McKee, I see your hand. You're recognized by the chair. You have the floor.
That was an accident. I'll pull it down.
No problem. So we have the motion. I'm gonna reread the motion for the record and for clarification. The motion is by Dr. McKee that the bylaws be reviewed to include that we have language that is inclusive of diversity, equity, and inclusion practice, specifically as it relates to for members to hold seats on the council, was seconded by Vice Chair Nicole Banks. All in favor?
Aye.
I'm
Me,
Okay.
Was that an
Was that an
aye?
aye, Ms. Dino?
yes, sorry.
Okay, not a problem. So it's unanimous. Motion passed. Is there any other further business to discuss? I don't, Ms. Jenkins, do we have any hands raised from the public?
No, sir.
Okay, I don't see any hands raised from the committee members. Since there's no further business, if there's no objection, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you so much for your time. I know we ran over, but it's always productive. We want to go ahead and yield the floor. That way we can have we can go ahead and give Act 310A subcommittee time to have their meeting. So thank you again.